Welcome back to my channel, and if you're a new visitor here, you're also highly welcome. In this lecture, we'll be looking at the right ventricle. The right ventricle is the right lower chamber of the heart. This is the entire configuration of the heart. And we know that in the heart, we have upper chambers and lower chambers. The upper chamber is made up of the atria, while the lower chamber is made up of the ventricles. So the right lower chamber is where we have the right ventricle, and this is the right ventricle. In this image down here, this is the right ventricle. You can see that it is located in the right lower region of the heart, just as the name implies. What this region does is to help pump deoxygenated blood into the lungs. And this is how it does this. Using this image below, this is the right atrium. The right atrium, we know that we have deoxygenated blood being pumped into the right atrium through the vena cava. So we have the superior and the inferior vena cava collecting deoxygenated blood from the different regions in the body and emptying it into the right atrium. So from the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood is then directed into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the blood that is deoxygenated is then pushed into the pulmonary artery, and this is the pulmonary artery. We know that all arteries carry oxygenated blood except the pulmonary artery that carries deoxygenated blood, and this is where that is established. So from the pulmonary artery, the deoxygenated blood is then directed into the lungs, and this is the lungs highlighted in white here. In the lungs, we know we have oxygen, so the blood becomes oxygenated in the lungs, after which it is then redirected back into the heart through the pulmonary vein. And we know that all veins also carry deoxygenated blood except the pulmonary vein that carry oxygenated blood. This is also where that is established. So the pulmonary vein that takes up the blood that is oxygenated and it drives it back into the heart. And the first region that it takes it into is the left atrium. From the left atrium, it pushes it down into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, it is directed into the aorta. And through the aorta, the blood is then taken to different regions of the body where they will be supplied with oxygen and nutrients. So that is how that is established. So what the right ventricle does is to help pump deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary artery and direct it into the lungs where it will be oxygenated. So that is the function of the right ventricle. Also good for us to add the fact that the deoxygenated blood that is pumped through the right atrium into the right ventricle undergo obtuse angular band of movement, and this is as a result of the placement of the pulmonary artery. If you look at how the pulmonary artery is placed here, it is placed above. You see it at the left upper border of the right ventricle. This is the left region of the right ventricle, and the upper border of this region is where the pulmonary artery emerges from. And we know that deoxygenated blood is being driven into the pulmonary artery. So there's going to be a form of obtuse angulature band that is created by the blood as it enters into the right ventricle. So it's also good for us to highlight this. And what this establishes is the fact that the blood is pushed against gravity. We know that the pulmonary artery is not located somewhere around this region. If it is located somewhere around this region, it means the blood will go at free will. But because it is located at the left upper border of the right ventricle, you see that the deoxygenated blood that is taken in tends to take an obtuse angular movement for it to be able to be directed into the pulmonary artery. And this, of course, will now lead to blood being moved against gravity. And of course, this can be used to justify the thickness of the ventricles. We know that the ventricular regions of the heart are thicker, and they are thicker because they tend to push blood out of the heart. They are not just pushing blood out of the heart, but they are pushing the blood against gravity. And this is where they need to be muscular so as to be able to gather the momentum for them to be able to do this function. So it is not an easy deal for you to push blood against gravity. You'll be needing a lot of energy to do this. And that is why the walls of the ventricles appears to be thicker. So it's also good for us to establish this obtuse angular movement of deoxygenated blood. And we know that obtuse angle mathematically is an angle that is greater than 90 degrees and less than 180 degrees. So let's drive in further to compare the right ventricle with the left ventricle. We know that generally the ventricular regions of the heart, as we have highlighted, are thicker in wall than the atria. And this is justified by the fact that within the upper region, what they do is to receive blood into them. So receiving blood into them They do not need to be muscular for them to do this because it occurs at free will. They do not need energy for blood to be emptied into them. But in the ventricular region, what they do is to pump blood out of the heart, and not just pumping blood out of the heart. If you look at the configuration of the pulmonary artery as we've highlighted in our previous slide, also the aorta, the blood is being pushed against gravity. So because of this push of blood against gravity, the ventricular region needs to be muscular for them to be able to gather the energy or the momentum to be able to push this blood into the pulmonary artery and also the aorta, depending on the region we are looking at. But we are focusing on the right ventricle. So for blood to be pushed into the pulmonary artery because of the creation or the placement of the pulmonary artery, which is seen to be located at the left upper part of the right ventricle, the ventricle needs to be thicker for them to be able to gather the momentum to generate the energy to push the blood into the pulmonary artery. And that is why you see that the ventricular region generally appears to be thicker. But now driving in to compare the differences between the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Between the right and the left ventricle, there are also some differences that are established between these two regions. So let's look at this. The right ventricle appears to be smaller in terms of capacity, and this can also be justified by the fact that in the right ventricle, the deoxygenated blood that is seen within this space is pushed into the pulmonary artery and is directed only to the lungs where it will be oxygenated. But for the left ventricle, the oxygenated blood that is pushed into the left ventricle and directed into the aorta is going to be supplying the different regions of the body with oxygen and nutrients. So you can see that in the left region, they are going to be supplying the different regions or organs in the body, while in the right ventricle is going to be supplying only the lungs. So this is smaller in terms of cavity, and this is justified by that fact. Also, within the right ventricle, the pressure here is lower than in the left ventricle. And of course, it can also be justified by the same fact because blood is pushed just to the lungs for it to be oxygenated within the right ventricle, while in the left ventricle, it is pushed to the aorta, which will feed the different organs in the body with oxygen and nutrients. So the blood is pushed into the pulmonary artery. Through the pulmonary artery, is then pushed into the lungs where it will be oxygenated. But in the left ventricle, it is directed into the aorta, and from the aorta, it is used to feed the different organs in the body with oxygen and nutrients. So you can say that the pressure that will be needed in the left ventricle will be more than what will be needed in the right ventricle because this is just directing deoxygenated blood into the lungs only, while in the left ventricle, it is directing oxygenated blood into the aorta, which will feed the different organs in the body with oxygen. So you can see that that can be justified by that fact. Also to add that the wall of the right ventricle is less thicker than the left ventricle. That can also be justified considering the fact that in the right ventricle, deoxygenated blood is pushed only into the lungs. So what it supplies is just the lungs for it to be oxygenated. It's supplying just one organ, so the wall is less thicker. While in the left ventricle, it is supplying the different organs in the body with oxygen through the aorta. So because this is supplying more organs and more regions, the wall is going to be more muscular than the right ventricle. And this, of course, can be justified with that fact. So if you look at the wall, it is less thicker. The wall here is more thicker. Talking about the external configuration of the right ventricle. The right ventricle, if you look at it on the outside, we already said that it is the right lower region of the heart. The right ventricle is the most anteriorly positioned chamber of the heart. And also it forms the inferior border of the heart. It contributes to the formation of the anterior or the sternocostal region of the heart. And it also contributes to the inferior surface or the diaphragmatic surface of the heart. Also, the external feature between the right atrium and the right ventricle, we have a groove that is created, and this is called the right atrioventricular groove. This groove is created between the right atrium and the right ventricle. It's an indentation that is created between the space that links these two regions together on the outside. And in this region, the right coronary artery and also the small cardiac vein are seen to pass through this groove or indentation. Then we have the interventricular groove. The interventricular groove is the groove that is created between the right ventricle and the left ventricle. We have two. We have one on the anterior part, and we have the other at the posterior region. So we have the anterior interventricular groove and also the posterior interventricular groove. So if you tilt it posteriorly, you are going to see a groove that is also created or demarcating the right and the left ventricle on the posterior side, and that is the posterior interventricular groove. Then above the right ventricle, we have the pulmonary trunk. This is the pulmonary trunk. We already said that the pulmonary trunk is located in the left upper part of the right ventricle, and this is where it is located. And the aim is to allow the passage of deoxygenated blood through it for it to be delivered into the lungs. So at the upper part of the right ventricle, we see the pulmonary trunk. Also, the ascending aorta is also seen at the upper part around this space. So this is the ascending aorta. The ascending aorta is linked from the left ventricle, where oxygenated blood is directed into it to feed the different organs in the body with oxygen and nutrients. So above the right ventricle, the two structures that are seen are the pulmonary trunk and also the ascending aorta. So let's drive into the internal compartment of the heart so that we can establish the features that are seen within the right ventricle. This is the interiors of the heart, and this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium, this is the right ventricle, and this is the left ventricle. Let's drive in to see the different specific regions or features that are seen within the right ventricle. For us to do this, we need to divide the right ventricle into the sub-regions that it is made up of. And the first one is the right ventricle proper. This right ventricle proper is the rough region of the right ventricle. And it is also called the inflow part because it is the region that receives deoxygenated blood from the right atrium. This is the right atrium. We know that deoxygenated blood is being pushed from here into the right ventricle. So it is the right ventricle proper that receives this deoxygenated blood into the right ventricle. That is the first region where the deoxygenated blood is first released into. This region appears to be rough, and this roughness is created by the trabecular canal. The trabecular canal ridges that are seen on the internal surface of the ventricles. And in the right ventricles, we have these ridges that are created. So this region appears to be rough because of the ridges created by this trabecular canal. Then we also have infundibulum. The infundibulum is the smooth region of the right ventricle, and this is seen at the left upper part of the right ventricle. This is the left part of the right ventricle, and the upper part is where we have the infundibulum. The infundibulum is referred to as the outflow part of the right ventricle. It is a smooth region, and it is through this region that the deoxygenated blood is finally released into the pulmonary artery before it is then delivered into the lungs where it will be oxygenated. So this region is also referred to as the outflow part or the outflow region of the right ventricle. This region appears to be very smooth. It is not rough as presented in the right ventricle proper, where we have the trabecular canal creating the roughness, but here it appears to be smooth, and that is why it is the smooth region of the right ventricle. And we have the interventricular septum. The interventricular septum is harrowed in blue here. This is the septum that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle. So it's like a demarcation that is created between these two chambers at the lower part. Then finally, it's good for us to highlight the supraventricular crest. This is the supraventricular crest. This crest is like a ridge that is seen in the internal wall of the right ventricle, and it tends to separate the smooth upper part from the rough lower part. So you see it like a demarcation that is seen between the right ventricle proper and also the infundibulum. The right ventricle proper, we already established that is the rough part of the right ventricle, while the infundibulum is the smooth part of the right ventricle. So you see it demarcating these two regions. It's like a ridge that is created between these two regions. We would be looking at each of these sub-regions of the right ventricle, one after the other, to see the distinct features that they present. So going further on the different sub-regions of the right ventricle, we already highlight that we have the rough region, which is also referred to as the right ventricle proper, and we have the smooth region, which is also referred to as the infundibulum, and we have the interventricular septum. So taking each of these sub-regions one after the other to see what they present. The first region we'll be looking at is the right ventricle proper. The right ventricle proper, we already said that it is a rough region of the right ventricle, and it is seen at the entrance. That is the region where blood first flow into within the right ventricle. And this region has a spongy appearance, and this spongy appearance is so created by the trabecular canal, which are muscular ridges seen within the interior of the right ventricle. So these ridges create this spongy appearance, and the relevance of this roughness is to prevent blood suction, because as deoxygenated blood is being pushed into the right ventricle, there's going to be a slowdown of blood movement. Blood will be slowed down so as to help control the pumping action of the heart. The trabecular canal undergoes some form of transformation. We know that the trabecular canal is the general configuration that is seen within the interior of the right ventricle, but it tends to undergo some form of specification. I will be taking this transformation one after the other to see where they are placed and also what they do. So the trabecular canal can be seen in form of ridge. A very good example of this is the supraventricular crest. This is the supraventricular crest that we talked about that tends to border or separate the smooth upper region from the rough lower region of the right ventricle. So this supraventricular crest is a form of ridge that is formed, and it is a ridge because it connects the atrioventricular border. This is the border here, to the interventricular septum down here. So you can see it's running from the atrioventricular border up down to the interventricular septum down here. But its connection is seen through its entire length, which means that it is connected to the wall of the right ventricle. If you look at this configuration up here, this is how it runs from the atrioventricular border down to the interventricular septum, but you see that it is attached to the wall of the right ventricle. So it's like a ridge that is formed. So this is the supraventricular crest. Another form of transformation that is seen could be the bridge. A very good example is the septomarginal trabeculae. This is the septomarginal trabeculae, and this is formed like a bridge. So you can imagine how a bridge is formed, where you have a connection at both ends, while the middle will be free. And this is what is presented in the bridge that is formed by the septomarginal trabeculae. These are called the moderator band. They are moderator band because they are part of the conducting system of the heart, because they allow the part of the atrioventricular bundles. And where they connect, you see them running from the interventricular septum down to the anterior papillary muscle. This is the papillary muscle. We'll get to the papillary muscle as we go through with this slide, but this is the anterior papillary muscle, where the septomarginal trabecula connects with to the interventricular septum here. And this is the way it runs, taking a perpendicular course to connect these two regions together. So this is another form of transformation. And if you look at the configuration up here, this is how it is formed. So you see it connecting at one end to the anterior papillary muscle and the other end to the interventricular septum, while at the middle, it appears to be free. And that is why it is called a bridge. And this is a moderator band, which is also referred to as the septomarginal trabeculae, is seen to present this kind of configuration. Then the last kind of configuration that is presented by the trabecular canal is the pillar. And the pillar, a very good example is the papillary muscle. The papillary muscle is seen to be connected to the wall of the right ventricle through the base. So you see the papillary muscle, this is the anterior papillary muscle that we described initially, that allows for the connection of the septomarginal trabeculae to the interventricular septum. So this is the anterior papillary muscle. We also have a posterior papillary muscle that is seen behind. Then we have the septal papillary muscle that is seen around the septal wall. So these papillary muscles are like pillars, and you see it as a form of transformation or specification that is created also by the trabecular canal. So if you look at this image up here, this is how they are formed. You see them like a very thick band of muscle that is seen to project outward into the right ventricle. And you see them, the papillary muscles are connected to the wall of the right ventricle through their bases. And what this papillary muscle does is to create a connection point with the chorda tendineae, which is a tendinous sheath, which further connects to the tricuspid valve. So you can see that the papillary muscle, their own function is to create structural support for the tricuspid valve through the connection that they make with the chorda tendineae. This would explain deeper as we go further with this lecture. So if each of these structures is pinned during examination, maybe during practical examination, we should be able to state the specific name of these structures, considering the fact that we have highlighted different regions where they are connected to, and also the kind of presentation that they exhibit within the wall of the right ventricle. For the papillary muscle, we see the way they emerge and their connection points with the chorda tendineae and also the tricuspid valve, and also the supraventricular crest that is seen to demarcate the smooth and the rough part of the right ventricle. And you see that they are connected to the right ventricle through their entire length, and also the septomarginal trabeculae that is seen like a bridge that tends to connect the anterior papillary muscle with the interventricular septum. And this, we see that the middle of the septomarginal trabecula is free. which means that it is not connected with the wall of the right ventricle. Its connection points are only created at the ends, where it is connected at one end to the anterior papillary muscle and at the other end with the interventricular septum. So that is the kind of presentation that is seen within the wall of the right ventricle. Let's go further on the papillary muscle. The papillary muscle are thick muscular bands that are created in the interior wall of the right ventricle. And what they do is that they help to control the function of the tricuspid valve. We know that the tricuspid valve is a control channel that is created between the right atrium and also the right ventricle. They are of three types. We have the anterior papillary muscle, which is the largest of them all. And this is the anterior papillary muscle that is arrowed in black. We also have the posterior papillary muscle that is seen at the posterior region. Then we have the septal papillary muscle, which is the smallest. In some subjects, the septal papillary muscle may seem to be absent. So we have three types of papillary muscle. And what this papillary muscle does is that they are being connected to the chordae tendineae. This is the chordae tendineae. The chordae tendineae are tendinous spring or cord or fibrous tissue that is connected to the tricuspid valve. So we have the tricuspid valve, which is the control channel between the atrium and the ventricle. And this is the tricuspid valve. It is called the tricuspid valve because it is made up of three leaflets. So it's a three-leaflet type of valve, and that is why it is called the tricuspid valve. Tri means three. So this is how they are formed. Let's say this is the orifice of the tricuspid valve. This is the junction where we have the right atrium and the right ventricle. At this junction, we have three leaflets because we say it's tricuspid valve. So we have the anterior leaflet. This is the anterior leaflet that is seen in the anterior part. And we have the posterior leaflet that is seen behind. Then we have the septal leaflet. This is the septal leaflet that is created around the region of the interventricular septum. So these are the three leaflets. So these leaflets are then further connected to the chordae tendineae, which are strings or cord of fibrous sheet, which appears to be strong and also tough. And these are highlighted in blue. So you see the leaflets being connected to this chordae tendineae. These are the chordae tendineae, and this is the pattern by which they are connected with it. So after connecting with the chordae tendineae is then further connected to the papillary muscle. And that is what is presented in this image here. This is the chordae tendineae, arrowed in yellow, and you see that the chordae tendineae, after linking up from the leaflet of the tricuspid valve, it's then being connected to the papillary muscle. This kind of arrangement has its own function. It's kind of creates a control support for the tricuspid valve, and that is what we'll be unfolding in our next slide. So let's see how this is done. During the process of contraction, we know that deoxygenated blood is being released into the right atrium. This is the right atrium up here, and when this contracts, it means it is time for blood to be pushed into the right ventricle. So as this contracts, and looking at the pattern of arrangement, this is the right atrium, this is the tricuspid valve. On the tricuspid valve, we have the chordae tendineae, and these are tendinous cord or sheets connected to the papillary muscle. So when there's contraction of the right atrium, considering the pattern of direction of the tricuspid valve, because it opens inward into the right ventricle, the opening is as a result of the chordae tendineae connecting the leaflet of the tricuspid valve onto the papillary muscle. Because of this connection, this valve is opened inward, and because it is opened inward, when there's contraction of the right atrium, the contraction will create a form of pressure on the chordae tendineae. As it exerts pressure on the chordae tendineae, it's going to force it open. When it opens, deoxygenated blood will then be pushed in one direction into the right ventricle, and it will be pushed in one direction because of the pattern of arrangement that is created between the tricuspid valve, the chordae tendineae, and also the papillary muscle. And the next phase will then be the contraction of the right ventricle. And the contraction of the right ventricle is to allow the movement of blood into the pulmonary artery, into the lungs, where it will be oxygenated. So let's see the activities that is exerted by the network between the papillary muscle, the chordae tendineae, and also the tricuspid valve in ensuring that the deoxygenated blood is pushed into the pulmonary artery and not back into the right atrium. So let's see how this goes. When deoxygenated blood is pushed into the right ventricle, there's going to be the contraction of the wall of the right ventricle. And of course, when it contracts, the papillary muscle and also other features or structures that are seen within the right ventricle will also contract. So this contraction will then cause the caudal tendinae that is connected to the papillary muscle to pull upward. So as it pulls upward, it's going to lock the tricuspid valve. And because of this lockage, the deoxygenated blood that is seen within the right ventricle will not be able to flow back into the right atrium. And that is the mechanism in ensuring that deoxygenated blood is not taken backwards. The other available channel within the right ventricle will then be the pulmonary artery. So deoxygenated blood will then be pushed into the pulmonary artery, then into the lungs where it will be oxygenated, because the part that is supposed to move upward has been locked and there's no other way for it to run to except through the pulmonary artery. So that is how the network between the papillary muscle, the caudal tendinae, and also the tricuspid valve modulates the movement of blood and also directing it to where it's supposed to go, which is the pulmonary artery, and not allowing backflow of blood into the right atrium. And the next region is the infundibulum. The infundibulum is the smooth upper region of the right ventricle. It is seen at the upper left region of the right ventricle. This is the right region of the right ventricle, and this is the left region of the right ventricle. So the upper left region of the right ventricle is where the infundibulum is located. This is also referred to as the conus arteriosus. This is a conical pouch region that is created at the left upper part of the right ventricle. And it is a region where deoxygenated blood is taken out of the heart through the pulmonary artery. And that is why it is referred to as the outflow part of the heart. And this is the conus arteriosus, which is the smooth upper left region of the right ventricle. This is one of the sub-regions of the right ventricle. So talking about the interventricular septum, just as the name implies, is a septum that separates the right ventricle from the left ventricle. And this is further subdivided into two subregions. We have the upper membranous thin part, and this is the upper membranous thin part. At the lower part, it appears to be muscular and thicker, and this is the lower muscular thick part. This is the lower muscular thick part that is highlighted here. You can see this region appears to be muscular, while the upper part appears to be membranous. So let's look at clinical anatomy. And the clinical anatomy I want to look at is tricuspid valve regurgitation. Regurgitation simply means backward flow. So when there is a backward flow of blood, to be deoxygenated blood that is supposed to be directed from the right atrium down into the right ventricle is not taken back into the right atrium. And this can occur as a result of improper valve closure. Remember in our previous slide when we tried to highlight the function of the tricuspid valve and also receiving support from the caudal tendinae and also the papillary muscle in executing this function of directing blood just through one channel, and which is pumping it from the right atrium to the right ventricle. When there is an improper tricuspid valve closure, there's going to be like a regurgitation of blood where there will be backflow of blood into the right atrium, and this is not what is needed. And when this occurs, there's going to be a generation of pressure within the right ventricle, and this can lead to the expansion of the right ventricle and it will become weak, and this can lead to heart failure. And possible treatment options could be by the use of medication. Surgery may also be needed depending on the grade, and surgery will be used to repair the valve or maybe replace the valve as the case may be. So let's check our understanding of this lecture through the following question. And the first one is, the wall of the right ventricle is less thicker than the left ventricle. Can you please justify this? This we have adequately justified in this lecture, and this should come easy. The second question is to describe the types of transformation of trabecular canal seen in the wall of the right ventricle. And the third question is, what is conus arteriosus? This we have also established in this lecture. So thanks for watching this video. Let's meet again.